Hi, everyone, and welcome back to God's Views on Political News. It's so good to have you back with us. For those coming in, just remember that you can comment all you want during the live show, and you can also ask any questions that you want to ask. Feel free to do so. And hopefully you can see my screen pretty well, but it's looking a little blurry. So hopefully, Bill, somehow we'll work it out and we'll get on there. Now you're just getting back from some of the trips that you've had.
Yeah, I was in Lubbock, Texas, then Amarillo, Texas, and got in late last night, early this morning, whatever you want to call it, from Oklahoma City. So, it's a coffee day. What can I say?
It's a coffee day. So you'll be on your toes, right? You're like all ready to go. You're wide awake.
Sharp, clear-headed, bring it on.
Teresa says, shalom, hello. And it looks like Dawn is in here as well. And as people start to come in, today I kind of want to talk about what's been going on with all the, unfortunately, the shootings that have been going on at schools continuously, it seems like. We look at that as though it's something that just occurred. I mean, I've heard people even claim that, it's Donald Trump, and that's the reason we're having school shootings, because he's making people, he's rude to people. And so their rudeness somehow now has sort of transformed into shooting people. But anyway, school shootings have been going on for a long time. It's been going on since the beginning of, at least 8 years ago, we've had school shootings, and nobody tied it to the past administration. But the most recent shooting that we've had in Santa Fe, Texas, where a young man, 17 years old, went in allegedly, I know he's confessed to this, but I'm going to say allegedly, went in and, from what we are understanding, what's coming out, at least in the news, is that he was looking to go after one young lady who did not want to date him. She said no. And he went in looking for her, and I guess decided to shoot other people. Ended up killing 10 people, and had intended to kill himself, but chickened out in doing so. And now we have, once again, 10 people dead. And we have nothing that's done differently to prevent this from happening again. Your thoughts, Bill?
Well, first of all, it's again another sad story and situation. And if it's true that it was, he was provoked by some young lady saying, "No, I don't want to go out with you." I mean, golly. I mean, it just shows you how far we have degenerated. Back in my day, if a young lady didn't want to go out with you, you just went out and wrote a song, or something like that, and then make $1 million. We've talked about this before. Every time there's a situation like this, and by the way, I'm not trying to make light of the situation myself.
No, I know.
People talk about wanting to pray and offer thoughts, and that's great. That's good. And the issue I have here, though, is that everybody wants to offer thoughts and prayers after this has happened. And again, not that there's anything wrong with that. But these things are going to continue to happen until we catch on that the prayer that needs to be offered is before these things happen. And by that, I mean, we as a nation are going to continue to hear about these acts of violence, school shootings, theater shootings, what have you, until there is a spiritual renewal in this land. And I know that I'm a broken record when it comes to that, but that's the problem. Now, in the meantime, yeah, I think that there are certain things that can be done practically. This young man, from what I've understood so far, didn't show any signs of any kind of emotional issues. And so maybe that's why his father didn't have those weapons locked up. But, the bottom line is they should have been locked up. He shouldn't have had access to them, or not free access to them anyway. And he probably had access to them for a good long while in order to saw off the barrel of the shotgun, or his father did something that he shouldn't have done, because that's illegal. There have already been cases just, days before this particular shooting, where somebody tried to pull some stuff at a school in Dixon, Illinois, and there was an armed officer there that put a stop to this. So there are things that can practically be done. and should be done. And I believe that I heard the governor of Texas at least infer that he intends to do some of these practical things to put them in place, at least in the state of Texas. But even then, I'm just saying that these kinds of things are going to continue to happen until we start praying to God with a contrite spirit, a humbled heart before these things happen.
Now, Catherine says so-called safe places and gun-free zones are the exact opposite. Teachers who are willing to train and carry should be allowed, and security in school is necessary to keep kids safe. Linda says, a spiritual matter, question, under the influence or posed to kill another for no good reason. Dawn said, we as individuals need to pray over our children's heads every day.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and another comment, Darlene said it's time for metal detectors and searches, entrance security and ID scanned. Teresa said, just a thought, a canine can cover a lot of territory better than a person or multiple people, which is true.
Yeah.
Linda said, a song about unrequited love, like I got tears in my ears from lying on my back crying over you. So,
yeah. I said that, Susan, kind of tongue in cheek, but the point really is this. When did girls start telling boys they don't want to go out with them? I mean, that's been going on forever.
Yeah.
And so when did boys start responding in this way? All right. So my point here is that there's just been this degeneration of culture and society. Everybody that's listening to this, we know this. All right. But it's getting critical now. People are dying because of it. And we told God, 5 decades ago, or close to 6 now, we told God, get out of our school. And he did.
Yeah. Well,
in the general sense, he did.
Right.
And so now you've got all these other things coming in. So again, there can be things that can be done that are practical. I think I've heard or read that there are schools in and around New York, for instance, where they do have metal detectors. That's a shame. It has to be that way. But obviously, we're not going to do anything spiritually en masse. So some practical things need to be done. If teachers want to be armed, I think that they should allow them to be armed. If the state of Texas, for instance, is willing to put armed guards on the campus, then that's what they should do. There can be some practical things that can limit, the carnage. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, and I say this respectfully, and not trying to demean those kinds of plans or thoughts or actions, but all of those armed guards and metal detectors and this, that, and the other isn't going to change the hearts of the kids that are going to those schools, and that's the core issue here.
Well, and I want to go back to something that you said a minute ago when we were talking about the shooter in Santa Fe, Texas. You said, I guess there were no telltale signs or something on that order of there being. At least from
what I've heard, anyway.
Right. But I guess my point is that really true? Is it really true? You wonder, and we haven't heard anything, but you wonder what the life of the kid was, right? Because here he was supposedly making all of these explosives. And the parents apparently didn't know anything about it.
Yeah, that's troubling.
Yeah, that's troubling. He wore like a trench coat type thing all the time, whatever. Not a real trench coat, but, a black coat, long coat. Now, again, I was telling people earlier, people in California, they wear hoodies all the time, even in the summertime. That's just what kids do. And a lot of people look at kids wearing the long coats. It used to be, the punk kids would wear that, the punk rockers, and emo would have their own look and different things, different kids. But isn't that, I guess my thing isn't that in and of itself, doing something like that, shouldn't that be a key or a clue for us to look at and say something might be wrong? The problem is in our society today, we don't want to question anything like that. We don't want to question kids. We don't want to question, what they're wearing. We don't want to say anything. It's politically incorrect. Somebody might think we're discriminating. Somebody might think that we're racist because a certain culture likes to wear a certain garb. This is where our problem, I think, starts, Bill, because we're no longer looking at things anymore and saying, you know what? Something's not right about that. We're supposed to look at things now and not judge anything. And I think it's part of what's helping our culture decline, is that we don't have discernment anymore that the good Lord gave us in the first place.
Well, that's a very good point. The fact that this young man is supposed to have worn a trench coat or something of, similar to that in Galveston, Houston area of Texas, which is, in my opinion, being someone who's traveled all over this country and been to Houston and Galveston, those areas many, many times, it is one of the hottest, most humid, miserable places on the face of the earth in when it's hot.
Right,
I think anybody that lives there would have to concede that it is hot and humid. So yeah, wearing that kind of clothing in the heat and humidity down there it's kind of that's out of the ordinary, or I would think would be considered out of the ordinary. So you're right; it's a very good point. Perhaps questions should be raised about that. What statement are you trying to make by wearing this
exactly.
when it's got to be very uncomfortable physically? Of course, we perhaps couldn't see this going in, but the fact that he's making these explosive devices, wearing something similar to a trench coat, harkens back to Columbine. Yeah. So you would. I'd like to think, as a parent, that if my kids started dressing out of the ordinary, if he had a fascination with certain things that were just a little over the top, yeah, I'd like to think that I would be asking some questions and I'd be probing and trying to figure out, because he had to go somewhere and build these explosive devices.
Well, and Darlene is asking me, in the middle of May, meaning wearing, I think that when I said that they wear the hoodies in the middle of May. Yeah, Darlene, they do. Actually, they wear hoodies all year round. Even in 90-degree heat, they're wearing hoodies.
Yeah, but your 90-degree heat isn't our 90-degree heat.
No, it's not humid, but it's dry and it's hot. And if you wear a sweatshirt in 90-degree heat, you are going to sweat. And a lot of reasons that kids wear that is because, in the culture that we have today, a lot of people let's say they don't dress like everybody else. They feel self-conscious, or they want to look like, sometimes like the rappers that wear the hoodies, and they're trying to be something that they're not. That in and of itself. And I understand kids, I'm looking at this from a psychotherapist point of view, because I'm a psychotherapist, but kids look at things and they try to emulate things that are going on. And then there are kids that emulate others, and it's a really bad thing. And it seems like that the school doesn't want to question it. And I don't know, is it their problem to do so? And yes, partially it is when the kids are there. It's more the issue of the parents to do. And parents, I don't think, and I don't want to label all parents, but a lot of parents are not paying attention to what their kids are doing. And I've even had a lot of parents say, I can't tell my kids what to wear, who to hang out with, what they should do. Yes, you can. That's why you're a parent.
Yeah, we're not supposed to be their friends. We're supposed to be their parents. Yeah, I agree. In general, this kind of behavior is the parent's responsibility. And if it's misbehavior, the parents need to pay attention, do something about it, address it. Does that mean that the child is going to respond the way they should to the parent's direction and instruction? No, obviously not. We've got a history that tells us time and time and time again, you can be the best parent in the whole world. I mean, God is a father, all right, but look how his children are behaving.
Exactly.
So, but at the very least, the parent needs to be the first line of. It needs to be the first in line to draw the boundaries for that child. And, I've told my kids growing up time and time and time again, when we had to address an issue, I can't make you do the right thing, but I can demonstrate to you the consequences that you're going to suffer when you do the wrong thing.
Right.
So if you want to get right down to it, that culturally we many kids don't have any consequences for their actions, their behavior, their misbehavior. And again, I'm speaking in general terms because I know there's a lot of parents out there that really, really try very, very hard. Right. And, we live in a very hard time. I mean, it's hard to make it in the world today. And so I understand how a parent or parents get busy just trying to keep their head above water, how they can lose sight of what's really important, and that is their children. And so perhaps the discussion that should be going on today in the wake of these kinds of things is not gun control, not even metal detectors and armed guards at the doors necessarily, but we need to see that our culture, the family, is deteriorating, and that we are too busy with this, that, and the other, and we're losing out on and allowing to slip through our fingers the most important thing that is given to us as a family, and that is our children. The children are the heritage of the Lord. He's entrusted children to parents, to steward, to guide, to set boundaries for, to teach them right and wrong, and to teach them that, if a girl says no, don't go get a gun, just move on, focus your efforts somewhere else, Anyway, maybe I'm rambling here, but that seems to be what I hear you saying. And I agree. The core issue is our homes, our families.
Yeah. And one thing that you said, with look at, like, God is the father, and look at how his children behave. And the point is too, and you made that when you went on further, is that God also disciplines his children,
right,
lets his children suffer the consequences, yes, and has us understand what happens when we don't do what's in the best interest of ourselves. And I think that, a lot of people today, I think some of the parents they have peer pressure just like the children, and they're giving in to peer pressure, unfortunately. And they don't have enough time, but it can't be the continuing excuse that is used on why we don't spend time with children. Now, Teresa said, when my children were little, I could tell when they got home that something happened at school and tried to talk to them about their day. Do parents do that today? And a lot of parents, some do, I'm sure Bill does, and Bill and his wife, Beth. But that some of the kids that I've seen, their parents spend about 10 minutes a day with them. And I'm not exaggerating on that.
Wow.
They're when they talk to them, they're usually driving them somewhere. They pick them up at school, or they're driving into, a soccer game or whatever. And it's that 10 minutes in the car that they use to talk to their children. I'm sorry, but I spend more time with my dogs than those people that do that spend with their children. That's absolutely not okay. It's not okay. And I hate to say this, but I've had to teach parents how to talk to their kids. I shouldn't have to do that. That should be almost instinctual, and it should be instinctual that we know that in order to nurture any relationship, you have to spend more than 10 minutes a day on doing that. And with children, a lot more than 10 minutes a day, because they're not adults. They don't know how to do things. They need parents to model the behaviors for them.
Yeah. And speaking as a father of 3 boys and 1 girl, I can tell you that with boys specifically, it is extremely important that the father be, I don't want to choose my words the wrong way here. It's very important that the father be that first role model that son wants to emulate. The daughter, when she's little, she loves her dad. That's her first boyfriend, so to speak. That's not to sound gross. It's just, they fall in love with their fathers, and as they should, because, that father's there to protect them. But the boys, they need their father to be the first role model they ever see. That's the one they want to emulate, hopefully for good reasons. And the father needs to be the one, I think anyway, who is steadfast in establishing those boundaries and those rules and showing here are consequences for stepping out of line. Because, by nature, boys are just tend to be more aggressive.
Not if feminists have their way, Bill. That won't be the case in the future.
Well,
I can tell you that right now.
I can tell you that in our household, that masculinity is very toxic. It's very pervasive. It permeates. I have 3 sons, so and I come from a long line. Well, never mind, Bill. Shut up. But yeah, there needs to be that male role model, and I think sometimes, and I'm not a therapist. I don't look at this from the scientific or psychological point of view. I'm just looking at it from common sense point of view. I know that I'm 55 years old and I still have these images of my father, those things that I admire, those things I respect, those things I didn't particularly care for, those things that I want to emulate in my life, those things that I'd never want to do ever. That's how important a father is and can be, either positively or negatively, for in particular his son. So, I mean, we can armchair quarterback about this till infinity, but you're right. These kinds of things, they don't happen overnight. Some kid doesn't wake up and decide I'm going to be a murderer today. It's an evolution of sorts. There's been things that have been going on for some time now. And it is, whether we like it or not, is the parent's responsibility to guide. It is the parent's responsibility to take responsibility for when our children step out of line. And in this case, it's pretty tragic.
And getting to your point about the dad in the household, when small children, girls will look to the mother as a role model. Boys will look to the father as a role model. That's just natural. You look to somebody that looks like you, that acts like you. That's what kids do. I think, I don't know about the other species, but when human beings, that's the way it goes. And the father's role is important, in my opinion, as a therapist and as a Christian therapist, and others would probably disagree with me. But the father, has to be there to keep boys in line. Just like you were saying, sometimes boys feminists wouldn't agree with this, I know, but boys are boys and they do things that are rambunctious and other things, and they have to be reined in a little bit when it's appropriate. And they're also, the father is important though for the girl, because the girls look at the dad, and that will be the man that they look to determine who their future husbands are going to be. And believe it or not, if you're abusive to your daughter, she's going to look for a man who abuses her, most likely.
That's amazing that happens that way, but it does.
It absolutely does. And not only that, but when the father is not being who he should be in the family, whether it's to the boys or the girls, that impacts a child's relationship with God. And the parents are totally responsible for the child's relationship with God. And it falls on the dad to make sure that that relationship with God is solid. And if he's not there, he can't do that. It is left up then to the mother to do that. And, it's a sad fact. Well,
in my line of work, I see what you're describing very often. And that is that, and kudos to the ladies, but usually the ladies are the most, or the first anyway, to recognize the spiritual issues in a family, the deficiencies. And in many cases, unfortunately, they're the ones that are setting the tone for the spiritual nature of the household. Because the men, and I'm speaking in general terms here,
right,
the men have focused on their career, the need to put a roof over everybody's head, which is important,
right,
and put food on the table, which is important. But the most important thing that a husband can provide is spiritual leadership in the home. And unfortunately, so many men, and I'm talking about within, the body of Messiah, so many men have delegated or just basically abandoned or abdicated that role and let the woman and the wife and the mom take care of those things. And that is not how God set it up. Now, mind you, the mother has a very important role in all of this, and the spiritual attributes of her children's life. The mother she's the nurturer, she's the comforter, and she directs and she sets an example too. But the way God designed it is the main responsibility falls on me in my house. It falls on your husband at your house. It falls on someone else's husband at their house. And when that is deficient and when that is lacking, the family isn't everything it could be and should be. That's just the way God set it up. And I know that feminists don't like that. And I know that there are those out there that think, well, I can do anything he can do. Okay, yeah, maybe you can, but are you supposed to?
Yeah.
And are the ladies supposed to take on that role? I realize that sometimes they don't have any choice. There's a lot of single moms out there that are, really, really, really working hard to take care of their family, provide, the basic necessities of life, and lead and direct their children. And, my heart really goes out to them, because I know how hard it is when you have a family that's really trying to do it the way it's supposed to be done. It's hard then.
Yeah.
Can't imagine what it's like for these single moms.
Well, and listen to some of the crime rate statistics, and this is really very sad. 70% of prison inmates were raised by single mothers. 70% of juvenile offenders were raised by single mothers. 70% of drug addicts were raised by single mothers. 71% of high school dropouts were raised by single mothers. And being a single mom is the number one reason a child is in poverty. Now, I tell you those statistics not to put women down, because, number one, if the man is not, if he voluntarily left the family, that statistic is on him.
Yeah, it's all on him. Yeah, that's not her fault. That's his fault. This may sound disconnected to some, but indulge me for a moment. The Bible says that by one man sin entered into the world, but what people typically focus upon is the fact that the woman is the one having the conversation with the serpent. The woman is the one who eats the fruit. That's what everybody focuses on. My argument is that conversation should have never been taking place, because the man was the one who was instructed to not only tend the garden, that is, work it, till it, what have you, but also to keep it. And the Hebrew word literally means to guard it, to protect it. And the inference there is that there are influences out there that would try to get into the garden and would try to corrupt the garden. And he was the one charged with protecting it, making sure that didn't happen. So my point is, if Adam had done everything that he was supposed to do, including guarding, protecting, the conversation between the woman and the serpent may never have occurred. So it's on him that happened, not on her. And so today, all these statistics that you just cited there, first of all, had no idea. That's not only amazing, but sad.
Very sad.
But that's not on the woman. That's not on the mom, because she's being called upon to do something she's not supposed to have to do.
Well, Bill, too, I'm sorry to interrupt you if you want to finish.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, when I was practicing law as a divorce attorney in family law, the one thing that I saw that just intensified what I just read to you, I also at the same time would practice bankruptcy law, because once the marriage had broken up and there were children involved, almost every single time the woman would have to file bankruptcy. Yeah. Because even though she was getting support, it's not the same, and the dads, a lot of times, sadly, the dads would walk away not only from the woman in the marriage, but from his children as well. And the dad would okay, well, you're gone. I don't want to have anything to do with my children either. That's not every dad, of course, but I saw enough cases of that to know, what the children's lives, how without the father, without that marriage unit, the mother and father unit, the lives of the children completely changed. And I mean, completely. It was very sad to see.
Well, with this young man that is now most likely facing life in prison, if not the death penalty. I don't know if at his age, if they will do something like that.
Not in Texas. If you're under 17, supposedly that even Texas won't give you the death penalty.
Okay. Well, then he's probably facing life in prison, or a very, very, very long time in prison.
Yeah.
So his life is over. I mean, his life is finished. I mean, yeah, he can get his life right with God. God's always forgiving. Yeah, he can even do things in prison if he turns his life around. I get that. But his life as God intended it to be is derailed.
Right.
You know, most likely it's not going to happen. And so, and we don't know the story. We don't know what happened, but I say it's likely, likely that, you know, we have the fruit of a situation where the father wasn't fulfilling that role. You know, I mean, I realize that there can be exceptions. I get that. So before anybody comments, I understand sometimes, you know, you can do all the right things and somebody still do something like this, but that's not the tendency in our culture today. That's not the trend. It's just what you described. So I said that to say this.
And we lost Bill.
That
there he is. Okay, now he's back.
I was going to say, well, something happened there.
I know.
If it comes out that there, you know, was some kind of a breakdown there in the family, and this is the result, that needs to sink in with fathers all over the country, that your vocation, your career, your stuff, you know, your boat, your this, your that,
right.
None of that is worth living the rest of your life knowing that if I may have been there for my kid, he wouldn't be in prison and other people's kids would still be alive. Now, I'm speculating here. We're making an assumption. I get that. This man may be the greatest father in the whole world, but usually things like that are the byproduct of there's something missing at home. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And Garrett even says, I've done juvenile prison ministry, and it amazes me how many of these kids were raised by single moms and also by grandparents. Many of them said that they had praying grandparents. If you watch any of the shows on Netflix or any other channel in regards to kids that are in prison, girls that are in prison, you know, in juvenile hall, almost every single solitary time, there is no father in the home. About 9 times out of 10, there's no dad in the home. And the kids feel absolutely rejected and unloved. And every time, you know, they just go downhill. Now, Jonathan, who said, you know, a while ago, I wanted to get some of these comments, and that's why God hates divorce when we were talking about divorce. And Jonathan Porter also said, you know, a lot of times we give kids the right to make their own decisions. And again, to me, that's a lack of parenting. You have parents that are to make the decision. And, you know, as they get older, you can kind of, you know, they can start making choices with your guidance. You know, you still don't just give up your guidance. Linda says, walk away and ask someone else for a date, but dealing with anger with a gun in your hand is a bad thing for everyone.
Yeah, really.
Absolutely. And you know, Teresa asked a while ago, you know, since I'm a psychotherapist, what do you do when somebody is angry? What do you tell them to do? There's so many things that you can do. You know, the quick answer is, you know, count to 10 slowly before you even react. That's the one thing you do. It's okay. We have to understand it's okay to be angry, but you have to learn how to deal with that anger, how to release that anger the appropriate way.
Be angry and sin not. That's what Paul quoted.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, that's why parents need to teach their children how to do that. But a lot of times, you know, when you have kids, if you're teaching, if you're, you know, in your household, you're cussing your, you know, your spouse out, you're hitting things, whatever, that's what you're teaching kids, you know, that's inappropriate. And parents have to learn how to model the appropriate behavior for their children.
Well, again, I'm not a therapist. I'm just a common sense kind of a person, but I've encountered this a lot, and even very recently. When the household is combative, when there is a breakdown, and who's supposed to be doing what, you know, and I mean performing their roles that God set up, and things get out of kilter and becomes dysfunctional. And I realize that every family is dysfunctional to some degree. But that growing up in that kind of an environment, that's what that child thinks is normal.
Exactly.
They think everybody's like that.
Yes.
And then when they get out and encounter people that maybe have a better situation, the mom and dad's there, everybody's trying to live right and do the right thing biblically. And then they encounter that, they have a hard time integrating into that. I mean, they like it, they want it, but you see that they're really having a hard time adapting to that because they're so accustomed to this. They thought this over here was normal. Did that make sense to you?
It did. And Linda is saying here, would you say that, Susan, do kids that carried a great deal of guilt over divorce, even believing it is their own fault? I have to tell you that 9 times out of 10, more like 10 out of 10, when there is a divorce, children will always blame themselves for that divorce. I don't care what you tell them. I don't care how, if you tell them that, we just don't love each other anymore and that's why we're getting a divorce. Most kids will think, if only I had done something different, my parents wouldn't be getting a divorce. If only I had been quieter. If only I hadn't gotten that B when I should have gotten an A, whatever the case may be, they blame themselves. And it's worse when after the divorce, the parents will talk through the kid to carry messages over to the other divorcing spouse. It's a horrendous thing for kids. Not every situation, I guess, can people stay together, especially in an abusive type situation.
Right.
But I think that they're far too often people just throw in the towel because it's easier to get a divorce. But, at some point, and I know this isn't, in vogue to tell you today, but at some point you have to put your kids before your own needs as an adult, the way I see it. And I know that's old and antiquated and all that, but, you're responsible for them until they're old enough to be responsible for themselves.
Well, marriage is about thinking and putting somebody else before yourself,
Right.
Preferring someone else before your own needs and desires. Whether it's your spouse or your children, that's kind of what family is supposed to be about.
Yeah.
By the way, that's what following God and doing what's right is all about. It's about saying no to yourself. That's the example the Messiah said. And he said, if we're going to be his disciples, then we have to pick up that cross, that execution stake, and follow him. So everything God calls upon us to do in whatever role, father, husband, minister, just disciple, he's always calling upon us to say no to your will, say no to your desire, say no to what you want, and put others before you. So, Beth and I have been married. We're in our 33rd year, and it's hard. I mean, it's even when you like them, it's hard, And so, it's easy in some ways, in some respects, to go out and just say, well, I'm done. And but back to the point about the kids, my wife, I don't think she'd mind me sharing this. She's in her 50s. She is a product of or a child of divorce, and she still carries scars. Now, mind you, she's overcome obstacles. She's gotten beyond the stuff the hurt and the pain that she experienced while it was ongoing and, the ensuing years, but she still carries scars. She still has to deal with the baggage of that. She just happens to be an exceptional person in as far as her strength, her determination, not to let it rule her life. Not everybody's like that. A lot of these kids that are in that kind of a situation, they turn to other things. And you just cited the statistics just a few minutes ago. So I guess what we're talking about is that a lot of the stuff that's going on in our world is definitely manifestations of a spiritual deficiency in our country, in our homes, in our families.
And we're not willing to look at it. For the most part, we really are not. And what Beth has that a lot of people don't have, it's called resiliency. You can able to work through things and get back on your feet and go forward. But Bill, I don't think today resiliency kind of comes naturally. Some people have it, and you either have it or you don't. However, we're not teaching children how to stand up on their own 2 feet too well. We're not teaching them necessarily how to go through struggles and how to handle things like anger, like Teresa was asking me before. Yeah. Teresa said here, okay, then in movies, kids see people getting angry and they kill the person that offended them. Yes, that's what they're seeing. And when you fill your head and your heart with video games or movies like that, you can't blame the video games and movies, but it's what you're putting into your head, and that's what you become. That's what you feel that how you should do things. That's what parents need to turn off TVs,
Yeah. Well, how you think will determine what you do.
Absolutely.
And so if, we made a decision. I'm not indicting anybody else and how they choose to parent. But, we made a decision a long time ago with our kids. If we allow you to watch any TV, it's going to be very limited.
Yeah.
And it's probably going to be through a DVD that we pre-selected that we know this is okay for you to watch. If you're going to play video games, it's going to be very limited. And certain games that some parents just don't have a problem with their kids playing, they're like, no, we're not having that come into our house. Because we've noticed that when kids that's all they do in their video games and this TV and all this kind of stuff, they're irritable, they're angry, they're depressed, they can't get along with anybody, they don't know how to interact with anybody. And who's to say that doesn't blow up one day in a schoolhouse?
Well, and also, if you're an adult and you watch that stuff a lot, you're going to be acting the same way, and you may be able to stop yourself. But think about it: when you're a child and you don't have the coping mechanisms to stop yourself, then you act out, you lash out, a lot of kids at very young ages, they don't know the difference between reality and fantasy after a while, and it kind of crosses over. I'm not saying all children, but I'm saying I've seen those cases, and it's unfortunate. Now, Marlene says God, spouse, and children, that's the order that it should come. Lots of divorce happens because they spoiled the child. Dawn said a marriage needs to start out in a godly matrimony. Too many times people don't receive spiritual understanding until later after children have been brought into a marriage, and that's true too.
Sure.
Linda said, I so admire Jewish families who follow the tradition of blessing husband, wife, and children every week at the Sabbath table. Boy, that would be something good to see. And then Beth said that Beth, your wife, is certainly an exceptional person. Well, we know that she has to put up with Bill.
Whoa. Wait a minute. Now, my wife said of herself that she's an exceptional person?
No, Beth said of your wife.
Beth Holland.
Yes, okay. That your wife is certainly an exceptional person.
Yeah, because you're right. She does have to put up with me. Sure.
We knew that already. Jared said, one of the greatest gifts I feel I can give my kids is time spent with them. And that is absolutely the greatest gift, Jared, that you can give them outside of telling them about God, in my opinion. And Darlene said, I don't think parents know how to teach without biblical principles. And Darlene, that's a good point that you made. There are a lot of parents, unfortunately, that don't have biblical principles because they weren't taught them either.
Yeah, well, it's it just propagates itself. That's that's what's going on. The seeds that we have sown culturally are now bearing their fruit.
Yeah.
It's, I think you've kind of said this or alluded to this, at least. We don't want to look at these things. We don't want to look in the mirror and say, you know what, I'm the reason this is happening. Right. I'm at fault here. It's a real easy thing to point the finger at the NRA or, whatever it is. Anyway, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, Beth says we were a movie family, pre-selected, clean, historical, with redeeming value, but didn't allow video games. I literally wrote a book on using clean family films, but we still monitored their time watching them. So agree parents should be involved in watching with them. And Darlene says, all of these problems are generational for sure. Now we've been talking about the shootings, Bill, but I want to talk about another instance that happened that we really aren't hearing too much in the news, and probably because, again, people don't want to look at it. But supposedly this occurred in Las Vegas, Nevada, back in April. There is a group of children, and I say children because they're middle school age, which is typically 12, 13, 14, somewhere around in there. there was a video that came out of a woman who they claimed she was attacked 3 times by this, and I'm going to call them this, by this herd of children that came out. They were just hitting her, attacking her. They broke her finger. She sprained her ankle trying to get away from them. Other people in the neighborhood said these children have thrown rocks at people in the neighborhood. Now, rocks can kill you, big enough size, hitting you hard enough, they can kill you. The neighborhood says, it sounds like, honestly, like vigilantes coming after these people in the neighborhood. They say that this happens a lot, that they've gone to the police. The police, they say, handcuffs the kids, lets them go in just a few minutes, and they're on their merry way just to come back another day. They've gone to the parents of the children and said, hey, we've got an issue here. And the parents are like, we're not doing anything about it, according to these people. And they've even, gone to the schools and said, can you help us out? And the schools, of course, are saying, not our problem. It's not happening on the school grounds. And they're right. It's not their problem. I look at it as it's the problem of the police and the problem of the parents. But Bill, do you remember a day and time where, we had these kinds of instances happening where 12, 13, 14-year-olds were, terrorizing their neighborhoods?
I've heard stories and, thinking about my dad and some things I heard him say that they used to do when they were kids, I guess there have been instances in times past when things like this would happen. However, I think even those kids at that time still had a semblance of respect and fear of authority, because when the authorities would show up, then, they would
scatter.
They would back down,
Right.
The difference today is, and this is just my opinion, is those kids, generally speaking, don't have fear of anything. They don't fear the cops because they know the cops are going to let them go. They don't fear the parents because the parents are shrugging their shoulders. I'm sorry, I'm going to say this. I may get in trouble. If the cops aren't going to do anything, if the schools aren't going to do anything, if the parents aren't going to do anything, then the men in that neighborhood need to get together and they need to bust some heads is what they need to do. Because thugs, I know they're kids, but they're stepping over the boundaries. All right. And if they are stepping over the boundaries to the point of threatening others with physical harm, have injured people physically, you're only going to enable them to continue in this kind of behavior if somebody doesn't, get the chutzpah to step in and do something about it. I'm not saying, leave them in the street, in a pool of blood, but I'm saying put the fear of God in them. Now, I don't really expect anybody's going to do that. I'm just saying until that kind of activity is met with equal or superior force, those kinds of things are going to continue because they have no fear of anything.
Well, and you see what would happen if those people did do those things. They would be in jail. They would be in jail.
I know that. But you know what? I'm saying this in general, and I'm saying this in thinking of all kinds of scenarios in my mind, not just kids that are acting like this, but just all kinds of things that are going on in our world today. There's going to come a point in time when people are going to have to decide to do what is right and put a stop to things, regardless of what the consequences are. Let me kind of underscore that point with this story from the Bible. Do you think God wanted to destroy the world with a flood of waters?
No.
No, he didn't. That's not why he created it. He created it to be inhabited with people. But according to the Bible, he saw things were getting so out of hand that he had to step in and do something he didn't want to do because it was the right thing to do. And had he not done that, things would have continued to spiral out of control to the point that the creation would have gone beyond the point of being redeemable. So that's what I'm saying. That's the concept. I realize that somebody that's underage like that, for some adult to come in and do something, somebody's going to get in trouble. Somebody's going to go to jail. All right. But that 13-year-old is going to end up killing somebody
Yep.
or hurting somebody so badly, they're going to go to jail. They're going to spend the rest of their life in prison, and this thing just continues to be propagated. I just think it's time for somebody to get some chutzpah. I'm not saying they have to, beat them to a bloody pulp, but you know what? The thugs, the only thing they respect is force. That's the only thing they respect.
David said, okay, how do we deal with juvenile delinquency that have no fear? You're right, Bill. We need a different strategy. In the UK, they send them away on holidays, etc., which only feeds the problem. Yeah, because it takes them away from the parents.
You give them a vacation?
Yeah, exactly. My gosh.
Okay, I'm sorry. Look, I want everybody to understand what I'm saying. I have a 15-year-old. All right. I have a soon-to-be 13-year-old. Mm-hmm. One's a boy, one's a girl. They aren't thugs, but they still step out of line from time to time. And I feel like it's my duty to make sure you step back over on the other side of the line, because if you're going to stay on this side, we're going to have a showdown. And they respect that. That's why generally speaking, that's why these kids are walking around doing these things, because nobody has gotten in their face. Nobody has shown them, you do this, here's what's going to happen, pal. I can't make you do the right thing, but if you do the wrong thing, here's the consequences. You would think the police would be the ones to step in and do this, but the police are hogtied now.
Exactly.
And if they do the right thing, then somebody's going to sue them. It's ridiculous. So I don't know.
Look at where we've gotten in our society that we're even having this conversation about having to take these type of steps towards children. And we have gone so far down because of the fact that we don't, and we as I'm just saying as a society, don't generally follow God, don't generally follow God's principles, lawlessness, on and on and on. And that's why we've come to this point where we even find it necessary to have a conversation about a bunch of 12 and 13-year-olds. We wouldn't have had that a long time ago.
I guess I'm old school, I'm sorry. But a 12 or 13...
It's not that, Bill. It's not that you're old school. It's society has changed from that.
Well, that's why I'm old school.
Yeah.
A 12 or 13-year-old should not be instilling fear in a neighborhood. Exactly. There should be men in that neighborhood that maybe they don't even have to do anything, but they just show we're willing to do something if you don't straighten your hiney up. I would like to think that there are still men in this world who know how to handle these things the right way. I'm not saying go out and beat up a kid. I'm not saying that. Don't misunderstand me.
Right.
But I am saying that these kids need their butt whipped. They need a board on their backside.
And you can't even do that anymore. That's a child protective services situation, and you would be arrested. I mean,
Yeah, I know.
The state has taken away the parents' power to most of it to raise and discipline their children. And I'm not saying, anything about whether kids should be, as I think Darlene or Dawn put it, whooped their heinies. I had whoopings, if you want to put it that way. And it caused me to know that I needed to get in line. I wasn't beaten. I wasn't physically abused.
No.
And nobody's advocating that. But you can't touch children anymore. If you leave a mark on children, just touching them, too hard, if you grab their arm, you're probably going to go to jail these days. And that's just a fact. Now, Jonathan said the adversary knows his time is short, is going after these kids whose parents don't bring them up with the fear of God, which is the beginning of wisdom. And that's really what we're looking at. We're looking at every single day more and more a godless society where children are there's no guidance, no biblical principles, nothing, no supervision, especially with these kids running around at 12 and 13 years old like that. And who would have done that, Bill? I mean, not in a million years would I, as a kid at 12, 13, or even as an adult, think about going out and beating up adults in my neighborhood. It would never have entered my mind.
I did some pretty stupid things as a kid growing up. Nothing like that, but I did some pretty stupid things, and I did some sneaky things. And my dad wasn't the perfect dad by any stretch, but I tell you what, I respected the man because I knew if he told me something, he was going to do it. And I remember one time I was sitting on a porch with the girl. We were just talking, but it was past my curfew. And making a very long story short, he drove by that house where I was at. He saw my car out front. He drove by the house. He didn't stop. He didn't say anything. As he drove by, all he did was he stuck his arm out the window and pointed like, you better get your butt home, boy.
Yeah.
And I left.
Yeah.
I don't think that exists anymore.
It doesn't exist. Now, Kate said children are a product of their environment. Some families have generation after generations of wounds. If the parents have wounds or scars, they will bring that into the marriage and raising their children. Absolutely correct. Some parents cannot and won't deal with their own issues. Beth Cloud is a very determined person, wife and mother. I have my own scars and I fight every day for my family. It's only by the grace of God we make it each day. We need the Lord in all our lives to get through the day. All kids do not need a participation trophy. Amen to that. It's true.
Well, I guess I might be in trouble with some of the people watching, what I said. I hope that my intent is not misconstrued. I'm just saying that these kids, if you don't get in their face, this is what's going to happen. And it's going to become more pervasive. So,
yeah. No, I mean, I agree with you, Bill. Men would only have to take about, let's say, 15 men at the most, just stand in a line. That's all they would need to do. And I'm telling you, just that, seeing that alone, I think would have an impact on the kids, not even touching them, just standing there in a line saying, you're not crossing this line. And they would get the hint.
And be prepared to back it up. That's the thing.
And be prepared to back it up.
It can't be a hollow threat. My dad said things. I knew it wasn't a hollow threat. I knew that he was willing to carry through with what he said he was going to do. And so I don't believe in being abusive. That's not what I'm saying. But I do believe that if we take this mamby-pamby approach to raising kids, that we're going to be their friend, we're not going to get in their face, we're not going to beat their butt every now and then. We're not helping them. We're hurting them. We're disabling them for life, because the world's not going to treat them that way.
No.
So, and more importantly, they need to know that God has established boundaries, and you step outside of God's boundaries, not because he wants to, but because he has no choice but to allow you to suffer the consequences. And though they're not good, it doesn't end well. So, that's what I'm trying to say here.
No, I think people understood that. Now, Linda Smith said, I was made aware that I did not do well teaching my children, gave little coping skills. Later, they suffered much better now with my daughters and granddaughters. And I'm glad Linda was open to hearing someone tell her that, because a lot of people aren't open to that. Now, Linda Norman said, I had an amazing experience in walking my dog one evening. A group of kids about middle age or older approached me, and the ringleader said, "You're lucky I like your dog," before going up the street, and it was very scary. It's becoming more and more of instances like that. We hear that. Marlene said, "My daddy's final word, be it," or is that what it was? I'm not sure. Dawn said, I heard a message one time where are all the men? So true in society. And again, we won't get me started because you know how I feel about this topic. But, more and more feminists and women today, not all women, but a lot of women, feminists especially, are trying to make men into women and trying to leave them powerless. Oh, get the belt. Yeah. Marlene said what her dad's on. And so, I think men need to take back their power. Women need to take back their power. Police need to take back their power. Laws need to be enforced. And until we do those things, after praying to God and turning back to God, we're going to see more and more cases of this where kids are ruling the parents and everything's out of control.
Better these kids get their butt beat than to get shot one day because they've stepped over the boundaries.
And Beth said here, Bill, isn't there a scripture about, children ruling over people by terrorizing them during the final days. I think, isn't that 1 Timothy 4 that talks about that, where about the spirit and how things will be turned to a bad spirit.
I think what she's talking about, that, one of the curses that comes upon a disobedient nation is that things are just going to be upside down, and kids are going to be ruling over their parents.
Absolutely. And I think we're seeing more and more of that. And I wanted to, we are totally out of time, but I wanted to thank everybody today. Love the comments. I wish I could have read all of them. Love the questions that you had. I thought this was a really, relevant discussion that we needed to have. I hope it was something that was good for you, as well as for what I think the benefit I got out of it today as well. I hope that you would share this with everyone. Let them hear the discussion. Let's get people talking, and maybe we'll find more and more solutions, and people will know what to do rather than sit and do nothing. That's the one thing that we can't afford to do, is sit and do nothing. So thank you so much for being here. We'll be back again next week. God bless you. Thanks again. Take care.